On the night of January 11th, 1942, a merchant ship called the Cyclops was steaming off the American East Coast when a torpedo tore into her hull. She was the first sunk by a German submarine commanded by a captain named Reinhard Hartigan in a boat called the U-123. Behind him were 4 more long-range Type 9 submarines sent across the Atlantic by Admiral Karl Donitz under a code name that would become legend, Operation Paukenschlag, Drumbeat. For the better part of 2 months, those 5 boats hunted almost unopposed in the shipping lanes of the world's most powerful nation. And the reason they could do it is the reason this story matters 84 years later. The American coast was wide open. There was no coastal blackout. Cities and beach resorts kept their lights burning, and those lights did something no admiral had planned for. They silhouetted the merchant ships against the glow, painting them as perfect targets for a submarine waiting out in the dark water. The U-boats simply attacked from the black side of the sea, and the ships never saw them coming. Worse, the U.S. Navy refused to organize convoys at first. Admiral Andrews argued that gathering the ships together would only concentrate the targets. Coastal convoys did not begin until the middle of May 1942, more than 4 months late. 4 months in which the drumbeat never stopped. And here's the part most people miss. Paukenschlag was not about spectacle. It was about fuel. In January of 1942 alone, that first wave sank 14 merchant ships, and 9 of them were tankers. That was deliberate. Donitz prioritized tankers because strangling fuel was the shortest path to strangling the entire Allied war effort. One historian tallies the whole butcher's bill simply. 5 submarines sank 13 or 14 tankers and 13 to 14 cargo ships in about 3 weeks. A slaughter in the enemy's own backyard aimed at the one thing an army cannot fight without. Hold that shape in your mind, a strong power, certain its rear was safe, its fuel lines lit up and undefended. Because in July of 2026, the exact same trap sprang shut. Only this time, the signal was reversed. Move forward to the Black Sea. Crimea hangs off the mainland by a thread. It connects to Russia only through the Kerch Bridge and a corridor of roughly 100 miles of occupied territory. Everything else, the fuel that keeps the peninsula and the southern group of Russian forces running, comes by sea, carried by what is known as the Shadow Fleet, clandestine tankers that dodge Western sanctions to move Russian oil. Industry estimates put that fleet at over 1,500 ships. If you have followed this far and it is holding your attention, a quick like genuinely helps the channel. Ukraine's goal here was never a light show. Serhiy Kuzan of the Ukrainian Security and Cooperation Center stated the aim plainly: to make Crimea cease being a rear base for the entire southern group of Russian forces. Cut the fuel, isolate the peninsula, and the whole southern front begins to wither. And Russia thought this rear was safe. About 2 years ago, the Russian Navy pulled back from the Kerch area, afraid of losing warships and the bridge itself. That left the Shadow Fleet sailing without wartime escorts. According to Russian military correspondents themselves, a source rooting for their own side, which is worth keeping in mind, the fleet's defense was almost completely unprepared. The tankers moved in tight formation, no defensive weapons, no cover from the Black Sea Fleet. The lights were on, and no one was watching the dark water. The systematic campaign opened on the night of July 6th into the 7th. The first targets were Shadow Fleet tankers in the Sea of Azov, small ships by modern standards, around 7,000 tons, roughly 140 meters long, built between 2006 and 2012, all under sanction. Ukrainian reporting named 8 vessels struck that first night, among them the Venera III, the Teti, and the Alexei Savrasov. From there, the drumbeat began. Every figure that follows is a Ukrainian claim attributed to Commander Robert Bravdy and Ukraine's forces, so weigh it as a claim, not a certainty. July 6th, 2 tankers. July 7th, 10 ships, 8 of them tankers, plus a cargo vessel and a ferry in Kerch. July 8th, 9 tankers. July 9th, 14 ships, 12 of them tankers, and this was the night naval surface drones entered the Bay of Taganrog. Moscow's own response is the tell. The governor of Rostov, Yuri Slyusar, confirmed 2 tankers damaged in Taganrog Bay, 2 sailors wounded, the crews evacuated. When the target's own officials confirm the hits, the claim gets harder to dismiss. So how big was this? By Friday, July 11th, one figure making the rounds claimed 48 ships struck since Monday, roughly, as the Kyiv Post correspondent put it, 1 Russian ship every hour around the clock. Ukraine's own security service offered a more conservative count, 35 to 36 ships in 96 hours, 32 of them Shadow Fleet tankers. Both numbers are Ukrainian claims, and they don't agree with each other, which tells you to treat the exact tally as fog. The weapon doing almost all of this is a kamikaze drone called the FP-2, built by a company called Firepoint, backed by naval surface drones from July 9th onward. The FP-2 is derived from an earlier design, the FP-1. It carries a range of about 200 kilometers and a warhead of 105 kilograms, a larger variant reaching further. Its own chief designer, Dennis Steilerman, described it bluntly as a cheap replacement for a guided bomb. Cheap is the word. Each drone runs about $50,000 to $55,000, roughly a third the price of a Russian Shahed. That FP-1 cousin, the long-range one, is worth a single note for contrast. On that same July 6th, it reached the Omsk refinery, Russia's largest, more than 2,500 kilometers away. But the ships in the Azov were killed by the cheaper, shorter-legged sibling. Now, a claim is only a claim until something independent backs it. Something did. Firms, an American satellite fire detection system, picked up a large blaze in the Kerch Channel, about 6 kilometers offshore, covering more than a square kilometer. Fires on the water north of Kerch burned for 48 hours, confirmed not just by satellite but by drone operators, by Russian civilians on shore, and by neutral sailors anchored in the Azov. The correspondent tracking this, Stefan Korshak, adds his own honest caveat. Not every hit means a tanker destroyed. A ship set afire on a Tuesday might be the same ship struck again on Thursday. The fog cuts both ways. But the strategic effect is measurable, and Western sources carry it. Because Russia controls the Kerch Strait, it moves traffic through one ship at a time with escort and inspection, and that created parking lots of vessels waiting their turn to transit, sitting still, waiting. The perfect stationary target. On the ground, the squeeze shows. Crimea declared a state of emergency and suspended fuel sales to civilians, reserved now for state agencies only, starting June 21st, the worst crisis since the 2014 annexation. Before that, rationing had already dropped to 20 liters a week per vehicle, distributed by coupon through a state app. Sergei Aksyonov, Moscow's installed head of Crimea, announced fuel will be supplied exclusively to state agencies responsible for maintaining essential services and ensuring security. It was Korshak who named the week. He reached back 84 years and pulled out one word, Paukenschlag. His definition ties the two eras together. It means tanker ships, lots of them, set afire time after time because the country operating the tankers thought his maritime fuel lines were safe, but that guess turned to be epically wrong. Of the present campaign, he wrote that a similar maritime holocaust is in progress and called the result comparable to Paukenschlag, by many metrics, more damaging than what the U-boats managed. One contrast has to be drawn honestly, because both sides claim they strike only legitimate targets. While Ukraine aimed at tankers and logistics, Russia struck KYIV on the night of July 6th in what was called the most effective missile attack of the war against a single city. At least 15 to 18 dead, residential buildings hit. Russia also destroyed more than 100 Ukrainian fuel stations along the Kharkiv-Sloviansk route and around Sumy, a mirror image tactic of logistical denial. Two campaigns, two very different definitions of a target. Which brings us back to 1942 and the trap with its signal reversed. Korshak draws the mechanical parallel exactly. Those parking lots of tankers stacked up at Kerch are, in his words, the 21st century analog of the eastern U.S. seaboard being lit up like a Christmas tree in early 1942. The same mistake, made by the opposite side. In 1942, it was the strong power, the United States, that fell asleep in its own rear. In 2026, it is Russia, a deep rear it believed was untouchable, its fuel lines lit up for a weapon it never planned to face. And that is the whole inversion. The drumbeat of 1942 was struck by the ocean's apex predator, the submarine, against a giant that hadn't yet learned to fear it. The drumbeat of 2026 is struck by a $50,000 drone against a 7,000-ton tanker, the cheapest thing on the water, killing some of the most valuable. Order of magnitude, not exact arithmetic, but the asymmetry is the entire signature of the campaign. What it means is still being argued. The Ukrainian reading calls it a turning point, Crimea ceasing to be a safe rear, perhaps the prelude to a ground push across the Tavria steppe. The cautious reading, Korshak's own, is quieter. However many tankers burn on any given day, the strategic disaster in the Black Sea is already done, but not every hit destroys a ship, and the whole thing depends on a steady supply of drones, 84 years apart, the same lesson, learned the same hard way. The rear is only safe until someone proves it isn't. In 1942, the lights were American. This time, they were Russian.